guys, my name is Max. I also go by Brainez Visuals online, and in this tutorial I'm going to teach you guys the thought process behind recreating the Omen character selection visual effects that you see on screen. We're going to go over the tools needed to instance specific items from Valorant, brainstorm how we are going to create the Omen visual effects, and finally, create said Omen visual effects. This tutorial won't be a step-by-step guide, but rather try and teach you my thought process. That means that it's expected that you have some Blender knowledge and know how the process of Valorant porting works. If you don't understand these techniques, I recommend watching a tutorial or two in order to gain the prerequisite knowledge before watching this video. That being said, I'm going to try and make this tutorial as straightforward as possible. Let's start by looking at what we need in order to begin. To start, you're going to need to port the game files. I recommend just porting the entire game files into a folder using a program such as UModel or FModel. There are tutorials online if you need help with that. There's also the Valorant 3D and editing Discord server with helpful support. You're also going to need to install a few add-ons into Blender: Animal, Node Wrangler, and the PSK importer for Blender. The third-party add-ons will be in the description. I also want to note that I might refer to a texture by its name, so if you hear me say something random, such as "let's grab the wrap-up," I'm referring to a specific texture. I hope that clears any prior confusion. Now let's begin the tutorial. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and open up a new version of Blender. And here we are. We're using 4.0.1. You just want to make sure you're in a new scene. Now we're going to delete everything in the scene. Next we're going to open this and we're going to go to PSK and we're going to hit import PSK. It's also important to note that you do not need to be on this specific Blender version. Basically, you just want to be on the most recent that isn't an alpha or beta. So 3.6 LTS could be a good point to start, or anything in the 4.0 ranges is good at the time of this recording. But now we need to import our model into Blender. So how do we do that? Well, as I said earlier, we need to export the entire game. So this is the entire game that we have exported. So what we need to do is we need to locate the directory for Omen. And in this case, the code name is Wraith with a W. So you're going to go to characters, then Wraith, then you're going to S0. And then because we're doing a character selection animation, we're going to open up character select, and I'm going to open up models. We can copy this directory, and now back inside of Blender, we can paste this and open up our model inside of here. Now you're going to notice it's looking very polygony, and that's because Valorant models aren't heavy in terms of the polygon count because they need to make it optimized for the game. So you're going to right click, shade smooth, and then it will look normal. From here we need to bring in the Valorant shader. The one I'm using I believe is created by Core Arts. I could be wrong. It's going to be in the description though. And yeah, so to do that you just hit File, Append. Let me grab it real quick, or the directory. And you're going to open up the .blend, and all you have to do is hit Node Tree, and we're just going to select both of these and hit Append. Now we can click this third dot up here, and this will bring in our texture view. So how do we bring in textures? Well, what we can do is you can either hit shading here, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new window by holding and dragging. We can go to shader editor. We can select our character, and we're going to check use nodes. And as you can see here, there's very key and distinct lines for where materials go. So this is going to be the body. And where do we get those textures? Well, it's the same place that we got our model from. So once we have that directory open, as you can see, here we are. We're going to go to character selection. And if we open up models, you can see there's no textures. So where do we get? Well, the textures for character select model in this situation, they're in the third person folder. So we can go here, we can go to materials. And here we have all of these textures. So we're going to bring in every single one as needed. So first we're going to bring in the diffuse texture, the MRAE, and the normal. We're not going to bring in the ones for the head because those are a separate texture. And I'm curious as to what this texture is. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a new image viewer here. Like so, you can bring in the image editor and you can just drag and drop it just to see what it is. As you can see, it's completely transparent, so we don't need it. So we can start creating our shader. So, or not creating it, just linking it. So you're going to bring in that shader that is in the description of this video. We're going to link it up. Next from here, we're going to bring in the diffuse color, then the MRAE texture to the appropriate slots. And then last but not least, you're going to bring in the normal map. Sometimes you have to do a weird thing for Valorant where you convert it to OpenGL, but this one already has it. So don't worry about that. You can just leave all of these as sRGB. Next, we need to work on the head. And so we're going to select the head material. We're going to hit use nodes. And now we can bring in the diffuse and the emission texture for the head material. So the way that this works is we can basically just plug this into a principal BSDF since there's no normal, I believe. In fact, you can open up the, this is going to be our first look at our materials. So this will be a good chance to view this. So when you export everything from FModel, you get these props.txt. You can use these to figure out what textures we need. So here we have the third person Wraith 0 head diffuse. We have that. And then we have the head emission right here. So now we need the flat normal texture though. So where do we get that? Well, we can copy this directory, and assuming that we have the whole game exported, we can paste it here, and now we can just find the flat normal, and we can use that as our normal map. And now we have to set up the shader. So we know that there's this portion is going to be the emission, and we know that this bit is going to be the diffuse. So how's this going to work? Well, what we can do is we can select the diffuse texture, plug this into there. Now we're going to add a normal map, then we're going to add a curves to fix this real quick. Valorant normal maps are not in the Blender format, so you need to invert the green channel for them to work properly. So we're just going to plug this into normal. Sorry if I'm going fast here. Actually, this looks really bad, so we're just not going to use that entirely. And also, this is very specular. This is not what we want, so I'm just going to bring down keep the roughness at 0.5, set the specular to 0. Okay, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a add shader. We're going to add an emission, plug this into strength, plug this into color. Then we're going to use a math node to multiply this value, so then let's say we enable bloom here, we can visibly see what is being emitted, which is really good. And just like that, we have a working Omen character from Valorant, which is really nice. And I'm going to increase this roughness to the max, then you can't really see the texture. See the difference? Yeah. And there we go, that's our character. So now we need to start with the actual visual effects. But before we do that, I'm going to start the animation process for Omen, and I'm also going to save this. Like I just said, we're going to be using animations, so let me grab those real quick. You can, once again, they're going to be in our character folder. So here's the Wraith folder. We're going to go to character select. We're going to go to anims. We're going to copy this, and now using that same PSK PSA add-on, we hit import PSA. We can paste this here. We can find the intro and make sure it begins with CS, because that means it's going to be applied with our CS rig. So now if we import this, you can see there's our character animation. And I'm also going to bring in a camera. This is from the original shot, but it saves me time when animating it, so I'm just going to bring it in real quick. And now we have the camera in there as well. And all the camera is doing is it's parented to the Valorant camera rig. I believe it's in core in the game files, but I'm not going to teach you how to set that up in this video because this is primarily for visual effects. But here's the animation, and in the next step, we will actually be working on the Omen, I guess, disintegration portion of this effect. So when it comes to VFX, you can't just go off based on the game files entirely, because there is some artistic liberty that you can take in between softwares, especially because Valorant VFX is created in Unreal compared to Blender. There's some stuff that you might just change because to get it looking how you want it. However, we still do need to analyze this. So if we look at the VFX that we're about to be creating, which is on the character mesh itself, you can see that the character is basically starting to turn into I guess it's like wind texture, and then after that the character starts disintegrating, and you can see that right here. You can see that disintegration starting to take place. So how does this work? Well, the basic setup in Blender here with materials. So the way that this is going to work for our character specifically is we're going to use a node called a mix shader, and the first input of the mix shader is going to be what we're viewing right here. This is going to be the base character, so no visual effects applied. The second input of our mix shader will be basically just the purple color, and that is what we saw here with the that. So this is what this node group is going to be. And this node group here, the factor, this is going to control the difference between those two groups. All right. So this is just going to be the mask, the color mask, and that's going to go right here. And then you also notice in the effect that there's a transparent mask. So we're going to use two mixture nodes. The first one's going to control color, and the second one is going to control transparency. So this is going to be our transparent node, and this over here is going to be our transparent mask. So our job is to create these four elements based on the game files that we are given. And yeah, so it's a bit of a hard task, but that's the theory behind it. And then the character, to be honest, in this situation is the hardest part. After that, it's easy. And yeah. So you might be asking, well, where is this so-called like character? Where's this wrapping effect? Well, we need to find the material files. So if you open VFX, oh, there's materials. You can go through each one of these, but if you look at the names, you're going to be like, okay, neither one of these really matches, so where is the material? I'm gonna save us some time. It's in this folder called overlay CS, and that stands for overlay character selection. So we have two versions. We have the props and then the material. We can use both of these. This one is a bit more straightforward, and this one here, this one's a bit more dense, so we're going to be using this one. Ideally, we would want to be using a .json, but it didn't export for this, so we're going to have to make do with the .props. So the first thing that I like to look for is the reference textures. So here we have 8. We have the generic MRAE, we won't need that. We have the gradients, we're going to need that. We have this, we're going to need that. We're going to need this, we're going to need this, we're going to need this. No, no, yes. So out of all of these, there's about 6 textures that we need. A good rule of thumb, anything that's generic you won't need, because it's just kind of like a default. You can do it yourself, no need for a texture. So I'm going to bring all of those in. And to bring in a texture, so let's say I want to bring in the Omen overlays, so we can copy this directory starting at /game, so right here. Then we can open up here, and assuming that you have the entire game ported like I said earlier in the tutorial, you can just paste this directory here, make sure there's no double slash. Now we can grab the TP Wraith S0 matte emissive. There it is, and now if we look at it, this is the emissive matte for the Omen character. So I'm just going to bring all of those textures in, and I'm just going to give it their own little section here, and I'll let y'all know once that is done. So here are the 5 image textures that were referenced right here, and then we're also going to take a look at the colors, because that's another thing that I like to lock in. These are vectors and scalar values, do not worry about those. You can use them, I eyeball it personally, but depends on what you want. So I'm just going to look for the colors until we find them right here. What I'm going to do is just show you guys how to make the colors, and then I'm going to give you the hex codes in the tutorial, which ones I actually ended up using. In order to make the colors here in the notepad, we can just create RGB. So we're going to go here, RGB, because that's what's shown. So red, green, blue, and alpha. So there's the red, there's the green value, and here's the blue value, and the alpha is 1. So this is one of the colors. We can duplicate this and just keep on going. Yeah, it does not look like I used these ones specifically. However, that doesn't mean that these are incorrect values. You just gotta kind of play around with it. I believe what I did for mine is I took the same colors from the smokes. So I'll provide those hex codes in the tutorial. So the 2 colors I used for this scene in particular, I just took them from the master file, but they were found in the game files, the colors. The first one, the darker one, this is the hex file 0090613, and then the brighter one is 1C194D. And now we actually have to start assembling this. So if we look at the textures, we know that some of them are moving and then some of them aren't. So let's take a look. What I like to do is just kind of have a mapping. What we can do is we can just move each coordinate by holding shift and just kind of see what it looks right. So X we get nothing, Z we get nothing. So for this, it must be the Y. And we can do is we can do hashtag frame divided by a certain value. So let's say 50 to start. And now if we play this value, you can see it works, but it's honestly a bit slow. So we can set like 9. And you see this looks normal. So we can use this value to drive the texture displacement. So there's that texture done. And then what I believe I did in the master file is I took this wrap up, and we can do a mix color. We can set this to an add, and this is the wrap up, as you can see, the mask. There we go. So now what I can do is I can add these 2 on top of each other, and now we're gonna get something that looks like this. And what that does is it kind of clears some more of those darker values. And then the last thing I did in the master file that I did, so the white value was the same as this bright RGB value, so I can copy this hex code. So I get something like this. For the darker one, I can copy that hex code like so. And then I believe I just clamped it a bit, so we get something like that. And then what I can do is I can duplicate this add, mute it for now. And then now let's focus on the Omen wrap up new, which is right here. So here's this. I believe I rotated it by -90. So it's something like that. And then I multiplied this with the Wraith 4x grayscale. So I can just duplicate this mix color, multiply, bingo. So now we get something like that. And what I did is I used those 2 textures to combine. So, and now we're gonna add color to it. So I can take that same multiply. I can copy this hex code right here. So now instead of multiplying it by texture, I'm multiplying it by color. As you can see, that is colorized versus not colorized. And then finally, we're gonna add these 2 together. So now if I unmute this, we get something like this. Keep in mind, this is the color. This is not the like actual mask. This is just the color. What we're trying to recreate right now is this bit. And so far, I think we're doing a pretty good job. From there, what we're going to do is this is just the color. This is not an emission. So we're going to plug it into an emission. And we're going to keep it at 1. Good trick is if you just want to have it like plain, but like not glow, just plug into an emission and set the strength to 1. From there, we're going to add like a Fresnel. So we're going to add a mix shader. Sorry. Oh, this is how you do Fresnel, by the way, if you don't know. Then we're going to add an emission. We're we're gonna take this RGB value. I apologize if I'm going fast here. And then from there, we're gonna add a layer weight and a color ramp. Plug Fresnel into here. This is what we get. I'm just gonna clamp it down a bit, and then we're gonna plug this into our factor. And now if we view it, we have a little bit of Fresnel, which is really nice. And I don't even need to clamp it, so I'm just gonna leave that there. And now, just like that, we have this bottom portion of our shader completely finished and good to go. And I think that we did it appropriately. Just to clarify before I move on, the way it works is this is the color bit. So the first bit is the moving part. And then from there, we plug it into an mix shader, add an emission to create that Fresnel. So it gives it a bit more of a 3D effect versus it just being plain and 2D. We can plug the output of our branch right here that we created into that mix shader. So now, as you can see, we have the two different color changes, and the next thing that we're going to create is the actual color mask to drive those two color changes. Alright guys, so doing the same process that we did earlier, we're going to make the color mask section of the branch. Here, I already grabbed the textures that I need. Again, it'll take too long for me to explain my thought process behind every single step, so I'm just literally going off the master file, but this is still an insight as to how it's done. I use Wraith Wraparound, the Limbs Fade 2, and Wraith Dissolve _height 90 Blur textures. So the first thing that I did was in the Wraith Wraparound, I hit Control T, and with Node Wrangler enabled, you'll get Texture Coordinate and Mapping Node. And then from here, I needed to increase the scale, so I set a value node, set that to 5. If we move the different coordinates, you can see we get different effects. And the one that looks best is the X. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on the value and do hashtag frame divided by 9. So now we get that same wraparound, and it's the exact same speed as the driver here was. Then after that, I took the limbs fade texture, I hit Control T to bring out that vector mapping. And after this, I set the rotation of it to 180 on the Z. So we get something that looks like this. After that, you can do this multiple ways. We can take the same value node here and set this to 0.5, and we will get something that looks like this. Or what we can do is we can just take a vector math node, plug this in between here. We can set the function to scale. We can set this to 0.5 as well, and we'll get the same result either way. I'm just gonna use this because it's already hooked up. After that, we're gonna add a color ramp, like so. And I'm just going to crunch these values here. So the black goes all the way right there. The white goes all the way up there. And then after that, we're going to multiply these two values together. So we're going to grab a mix color, set this to multiply. And we're just going to multiply these two textures together. And I believe I set to around 0.6. So then we're going to get something that looks like this. And if we play it, you can see that this is in fact moving, which is good. And then after that, what I did was I actually used a gradient texture, and this is animated, and this is what's going to control a good portion of the, I guess, reveal. So the way that's done is gradient texture, mapping node, or just that, yeah. I'm sorry. Make sure it's ungenerated. And then we're going to set this gradient texture to quadratic. And then after that, we're going to add a color ramp, plug this into factor, and we're going to set this white to there, and we're basically just going to invert it. So we're going to get something that looks like this. And then we're going to set a rotation here on the vector to 90. So now when we move it up and down on the X, it's a reveal. And this is going to be one of our main drivers for that reveal. After that, we're going to take the same multiply, and we're going to multiply this with this. And what the multiply function is doing now is it is forcing this texture to only be visible where there's white on this texture. So that's what the multiply function is doing. And then finally, last but not least, we're going to take our last image texture. This is the Wraith Dissolve one. And from here, we're going to hit Control T. We're going to scale it. I'm just going to take this value node right here and right there. Plug this into scale. Yeah, we can leave this at 1. And then after that, we are going to grab that same gradient texture here. We're going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it. One thing I forgot to mention, before you duplicate that, make sure you animate it how you want it to. So in this case, if we're doing a reveal, I'm going to set my X coordinate here on this probably to like 0. Let's see, maybe like 0.4, maybe a bit higher, like there. And now we're going to hit I on our keyboard. If you want to see it, I believe you just select the character right there. Yep, and there's the keyframe. So we can set this right here. And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to right here, this last frame. I'm just going to increase this probably like there. Actually, yeah, this is looking good. So I think I'm gonna rock with this, and then the frame right after, right here, I'm gonna set this back to 0. And I think this is what I'm gonna rock with for the keyframes. Obviously, I'll adjust this later to fit with the actual intro, but this is gonna be fine. Anyways, back to the point. We're gonna duplicate this now. And what we can do is we can copy these keyframes if we hit I, paste them, and bring them here. So now this should be the exact same thing, and it's animated. And then from here, we're gonna grab a math node and just multiply these two. You can also use one of these nodes over here, but because we're dealing with black and white textures, there's no need. So we can just grab a multiply node. So now this is being revealed, which is exactly what we want, which is good. You can also change this to your liking. I believe in my version I set to 1.3. So we're gonna get something that looks like that. And after that, I'm gonna multiply again, and this is just gonna kind of increase the strength of it. I think it's set to 1.54.3. Yeah, so what I wanted to do is make it wider, so I just used a multiply value, and then I clamped it. And what that does is it essentially limits the black and limits the values. So the actual value might be from like 0 to 154, but the clamp does is it translates that to a value from 0 to 1, and it's useful at times, and this is one of those cases. And then after that, I duplicate this multiply, I plug these two in, and I change this node here to an add. So now we get something that looks like this. And then finally, I grabbed an invert color, and then I plugged this into the mix shader with the color. So now if we view this, we should, assuming no issues, have a working. Oh, and the last thing, we're actually not going to use this invert node. Just plug this in directly. And now as you can see, we have the color mask working properly. And this is exactly what we want, because next we're going to focus on transparency. And yeah, so as you can see, this is working pretty well, and I like the way that this turned out. So now in this next section, we're going to go onto the actual transparency, and at the very end, you'll notice that there isn't any emission. So to fix that, we'll also go over how to add it in at the end of the shading pipeline. And yeah. Alright guys, so as you can see here, where we left off, we finished our Omen, I guess, character animation. One thing that I did notice, and I was trying to fix, initially when I left off, I left this mapping node right here with the Omen wrap new under UV, and if we do that, it doesn't get a lot of color. But if we set it to objects here, then we kind of get these lines, and that's more accurate. So that's what I ended up setting that to. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. But the other thing I noticed was I was getting back through the character select, and the character actually doesn't become transparent, but rather we get these little emissive lines that we need to add, or not emissive bits that we need to add. So that's what we're going to be doing. So instead of a transparent mask, it's going to be essentially just the emission being added over. So we don't even need a mix shader anymore. We're going to be using a series of add shaders. So let's begin. So to start, this two textures I ended up using was the CS wrap-up mask and the Q tendril mask, TGA textures. From there, we can add a mix color, which is this node right here. We're going to set the function to add, so it's going to add the two images on top of each other, like so. And now if we view this, this is what we're going to get. Now we're going to add a color ramp, and we're going to increase this factor to 1. And all we're going to do is we're going to invert this, so then the white becomes black. And now if you look at this, this is very similar. And then we're just going to crunch these values quite a bit, basically the most we can before it disappears, so right about there. Then after that, we're going to grab a mix color again. We are going to set this to multiply. And then we're going to take this input right here, this add, and we're going to take the result. Basically, we're going to take the result of the color mask, and we're going to plug it into this, and we're going to multiply those two values. So we'll get something that looks like this. So now we're basically masking where the emission is going to happen, and that's all that does. All right. Then after that, what we're going to do is we are going to create a math node, and this is going to be a multiply node. And this is going to be the emissive strength of the shader. And then finally, we're going to add an emission node, like so, and we're going to plug this value into strength. So now, as you can see here, we have our emission. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this emissive color right here. Now we can copy this hex code, delete it, go back here, and we can paste our hex code like so. This emission is obviously too much, so I'm going to set it to like probably 1.5. Yeah, that looks good. And then finally, we're going to add an add shader, and it's going to be the first one. So now if we link these two, we have the emission actually showing and it's working and it's really good. But if you look at the character select animation, the emission doesn't quite happen immediately. It's like once it's on this character, you don't see it immediately. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to animate this emission. We're going to do this through this multiply node right here. So I'm going to increase the value, like probably once we get right here, increase this, like so. And then probably once we're like right here, it's probably going to be 0. And then once we get here, this is where we want to like kind of fully be. So like that. Maybe a bit sooner. And then I actually think that this is too much though, because if you look at the balloons, maybe like 5. This is kind of where I said you can kind of toy with it, figure out what you need. And I actually like this, what we got going on so far. Obviously these node groups are looking a bit dirty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create groups. So to do that, you select your group of nodes. So in this case, all of these nodes right here are the color mask. So we're going to hit Shift A, layout, we're going to hit a frame. And then what you can do is you can move the frame over to the side. You can move all the nodes inside of that frame like so. And then what you can do is you can click here and you can go to node and you can change the label. So in this case, I'm just going to call this color mask properties and then just increase the size. So there we go, there's our frame. And now what you can do is you can bring that, duplicate it, bring it right down here. And we can just move all of these in here. And this is going to be our color. Now we can duplicate this frame again, plop that in there. This is going to be our emission. Alright, this is what we have so far for the Omen shader. However, I'm going to add one more set of nodes, and this is going to be the emission for Omen, because if we look back at the original texture, there's some parts that are glowing that aren't there. So to fix that, what we can do is we're going to open up the Wraith, the Omen game files. We're going to go to third person, materials, and we're going to find the emission matte, which is right here. So I'm going to copy this directory, drag that in. And now what we can do is, it's very simple. We're basically going to duplicate the same setup that we have here. The only difference is that there's no need for a mask. Actually, you know what? We are going to use a mask because we already have an emission that's appearing right here and we don't want to go over it twice. So we're going to duplicate this ad shader. We're going to move it over like so. Move over this material output. We're going to select the emission map. Now we're going to add a color ramp. And instead of inverting it, because it's already what we want, we're just going to clamp it or kind of increase the contrast so we get something like that. So it's very bright, exactly what we want. And then from there, we're going to add a multiply node. Oh, sorry. I can't duplicate that because it's in a frame. So we're just going to add a math node, set this to multiply. And from here, you can increase the value to whatever you want. So like I might go 17. All right, let me see how much I have over here on the shader. 25. So we're going to be using that value. And then finally, we're going to set this into the exact same emission node. So we're just going to create an emission. We can copy this color code again. So we can select the color and make sure that the multiply is plugged into strength, not color. And then finally, we're going to bring this back into the ad shader. So now that emission is complete. It is looking a little funky though, the emissive matte. Let me just make sure that it's the matte and not the... Alright, so that's not looking funky, it's this. Okay, this isn't visible from the camera view at all, so I think I'm just going to leave it like that. It works, which is good. So now, yeah, it works. So I guess the Omen VFX, or at least the character selection bit. I did make an alternate teleport version, and the alternate version that I made, it's basically the third person teleport. It's the exact same concept up to here with the color mask. Like as you can see, it looks the exact same. The only difference is that the mask that we're using to derive the what do you call it? I'm sorry, the color change is just a bit more liney, and then the way that was done was, I believe we used, yeah, this texture right here is the main driving force, instead of the going up and down, and that's the only difference. And then to actually make it go transparent, we inverted the mask. So we inverted the mask and delayed the animation, so that way the transparency would be on inverted planes, or like on an inverted spot as the purple, and then it's a bit delayed, so that way you kind of get this effect in this animation. It looks really good once it's well done. Anyways, but that is essentially the Omen character selection bit, and now I'm gonna kind of go into how I did the I guess the flipbooks of it too. because if you look at my version on Twitter, I have a few other stuff like, you know, just elements, but I'm gonna focus on those sparks right there, and as to how they were done. So I'm gonna get into that next. So if you look at the Omen teleport, you can see that there's some sparks that come up right here, and we can actually figure out what texture that is and what color it needs to be and all of that just through looking at a screenshot and looking through the game files. So if we open up the Omen character files, we can go to character select, we can go to VFX, materials, see all of these elements. What's also cool is that if you go to the S0 and VFX, you have the meshes for all of these, which is really cool. So like for example, there was the bomb radial burst or ground power or something. You go to meshes and you can find something similar that sounds right. Not all of them are that way, but you know, there's some. Anyways, but if we go to character select materials, character select VFX materials, you can see spark, ether spark. Now if you think to yourself, what is this? This is a spark. So we can use common knowledge and assume that the spark animation is going to be the exact same that was used in the character selection. So in order to make that spark, we're going to be using something called a Flipbook texture. And a Flipbook texture is, I'll actually show you, but first we need to grab the texture. So if we open up the ether spark new props, we can see the reference textures. It's only one and it's right here. So we can copy this, copy, like so. We can open this, paste it, be sure to delete the last bit. And we can just find ether right here. Now we can open up this, and all we're gonna do is instead of creating a plane, actually we're gonna go ahead and create a plane. So we're gonna hit Shift A, new plane. Make sure you do not change the scale or anything like that. And now I'm gonna bring in the Flipbook texture. So now we can close this. If you look at this Flipbook texture, it's multiple frames, but we need to essentially move the UV map, which is right here. So this is what we're looking at right now, right? If we go to shading and actually create that material, this is what we're looking at right here, right? However, the way that the Flipbook texture is intended to work is supposed to be like this. That's supposed to move here, that's supposed to move here, that's supposed to move here every single frame. So it'll basically come out as a full animation, which is really cool. We are going to be using a plugin called AnimAll to generate this effect. So basically, to generate this effect of the animation, we need to use a plugin that will allow us to animate our UVs. So we're going to be using something called AnimAll. If I'm not mistaken, it is in Blender by default, but if not, you should be able to find it on like GitHub or something. If it's not in Blender by default, I'm going to put it in the description of this video. But from my understanding, it is. So what we need to do is enable the add-on, and then once you enable the add-on, we can open up this side panel right here. And the way you do that is you just click this little arrow right there. And we're going to go to animation, and then you're going to see this thing called the AnimAll. We're going to make sure it's key selected only, and we're going to select UV map. Now we're going to go to our very first frame, which is right here, frame 1. Or actually, we're going to go to frame 0. Hit Tab, A, and I'm actually just going to move the UV map right here. I'm going to hit Insert Key. Now we're going to go to frame 1, Insert Key, Insert Key, Insert Key, Insert Key. And now I'm not done, but if we play this, you see how we have that animation. And that's how I do Flipbook anims. Other people do it through shaders, but I find this method to be the easiest because it gives us visible keyframes that we can move. And it works really well. So I'm going to come back here once I'm done animating this. Alright guys, so as you can see here, I have finished animating the sparks. It's the same ones that are right here, as you can see. So now the question is essentially, well, how do we get these looking like that? Well, the method that I've figured out kind of working the best is we can take our image texture right here, and it doesn't matter if you delete any of this stuff, because as long as the texture is plugged into the UV, either through a mapping node or just directly, the UV is animated, not the actual texture. So this can be flipped out with any other Flipbook texture as long as it has the same 4x4, which is really nice. So, but anyways, that's different. We can delete this, and now we have just this texture, and we're actually going to plug it through an emission. And now we're going to grab a mix shader and a transparent PSCF. Our goal is to make it so that way there's only emissive where there's color, and where there's black there will be nothing. So what we can do is we can actually disconnect this from the emission, and we're just going to plug this directly into the factor. Now we're going to add a color ramp, and we're just going to kind of bring it down and crank this up like so. And now if I plug this in, we can actually invert this by doing this like so. And now we can set this blend mode to alpha blend, and we can set the shadow mode to none. And now, as you can see here, we have our Flipbook texture. And I can increase this emissive strength. And what we can actually do is we can take the same overall emission color from our Omen here. And we can actually paste this, because if you look in the reference video, you can see it's the same color as the emission. So we can just copy that. Now we can paste this here. And now, if we play it, we have emission, which is really cool. And I'm gonna set this to 25 because that's how much the Omen character was. So if we go into camera view and I play this, you can see we have these sparks here. And now we can scale them down, we can position them however we need to. So like there's one. Another thing you can do is you can duplicate this plane and then maybe move it over a bit, like so. And then instead of having it the exact same time count, I can actually just scale it down a bit and maybe just like so. And then I might actually move the keyframes even more, so it's like so. You can just kind of keep on layering these, and it ends up looking like really nice, awesome. And then now we're gonna get something that looks like that. Anyways, besides that, there's the Flipbook textures, I guess, for the Omen character, and the way that's done is literally just through planes, and it works really, really well. But that's how those sparks were done. And the last thing I want to show you guys is how to do the trails in my version of the cinematic, which are basically these things right here, and that'll be covered in the next section. Before we do that, I'm going to clean up the shader in the main one. So all I'm going to do is just drag these nodes here into the emission. So now we have our little emission box, and the character select shader is complete from this point. This is the Flipbook shader, and yeah, so now we're going to go ahead and do the trails. For the trails, I figured it would just be easier if I showed you all, I guess, the final shot that I ended up doing. There's obviously a few other elements here that I didn't quite cover. Like there's this one radial kind of behind the character, and there's also the, I guess, smoke ball that I have going on. But what I want to focus on right now is these trails right here. And the way that was done was actually really simple. So basically, under the VFX, you need to go to the Wraith folder here. Then we're going to go to VFX, and we're going to go to Meshes. What I would do is in Blender, I would copy all of these, go to Q, or File, Import, say GLTF. You're going to paste this here, and you just select A, and you hit Import. You see what mesh looks like a trail. In this case, it was these spirally ones right here that I positioned. And then in order to actually get it looking like a trail, I followed the Radianite trails here. And I literally just copied this, found the textures. Like here we have Q tendril mask, Q tendril mask. We have Wraith Strand. Wraith Strand was right there. And then we had Omen Energy Pan. There's Omen Energy Pan. So you just have to take the textures that are given, and from there, do what works best. So for this specific shader though, with this mesh, I took this texture right here, and I'm actually just going to expand my viewport in case y'all cannot see well. And I'm also going to disable bloom. There we go. Okay, so I took this texture right here, right, the Omen Energy Pan, and we can hit Control T, and on the UV we can animate different axes. So this is the X, this doesn't look right. This is the Z, this doesn't look like. But if we move it on the Y, this looks like a trail motion. So we can use that same driver technique that we used to animate the spinning of the color texture. We can set this like divided by like 9 or something. And now, as you can see, we have a moving spinning texture, and it looks really good. And this is how you can do it, animate procedurally, just using the drivers. So you do hashtag frame divided by whatever value you want. And if I divide this by like 100, it'll go super slow. But if I divide this by 20, it'll go a bit faster. If I divide it by 100, it'll go super slow. But I'm going to keep it at frame divided by 9 so that we get this. And this looks really good. Next thing I did was I took the mask here, this mask here, and I just multiplied the two using a mixed color. So multiply, set the factor to 1. Then I duplicated this again, and I linked the Wraith Strand mask texture. So then we get something that looks like this. This is the original, and we got something that looks like that. So just a bit softer. And then the last thing I did was I took this explosion beam thing, this texture. I don't think it was included in the files, but it looks good to me. So I took that, I inverted it. So this is what we had originally, and I did that. So what this does is now that the white, it will be only on the edges essentially. And then I multiplied these two together. So as you can see here, it kind of keeps the edges that's what that does. Or actually, I'll just show you all the this. So then what I did was the color ramp. I think I did this to clamp it, I'm not too sure, or like just make it black and white. And then I used that same transparency shader that I set up earlier. So you have our color ramp, right? Like so. And after that, we're going to create our mix shader, like so. We're going to create in our emission, and then we're going to create in our transparent BSDF, like so. Make sure the blending mode is right. And as you can see, it's already kind of working, but we just want to hone it in a bit more. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this. We are going to add in another color ramp. Plug this in right here. And this is going to be determining what's transparent and what's not. So I'm just going to invert it, have it like that. And this actually looks pretty good to me, like that. And then from there, we're going to plug this into strength and then add a math node. And then this would be our multiplier. So then this allows us to control the strength, and if we enable bloom, you can see that more so in effect than not. And then finally, we can copy the color. It's the same color as the sparks. And just like that, we basically just remade the shader. And that's how those trails are done. So this is the Omen tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm sorry it was very unscripted, unstructured, but it's very complicated, so I just needed to show you it in the best way that I knew how. And yeah, so I hope that this tutorial helps you guys. I hope that the Flipbook tutorial was very informative because a lot of Valorant textures especially revolve around that and you can get very far with that. Anyways, have a great day. My name is Max or Brains. I'm open for client work if you want to hire me. Have a great day. Bye.